Jackson Merritt had hands that could fix anything. Cracked engine blocks, busted water pipes, rotted fence posts, if something was broken in Clover Creek. Tennessee, Jackson was the man people called. He was broad-shouldered, quiet-spoken, and had a laugh that came slow but filled up whatever room he was standing in. He was the kind of man who showed up early and left late, who remembered your kid's name and asked about your mama. Everyone in that small town knew Jackson Merritt, and everyone respected him. But there was one thing Jackson could not fix, and it nearly destroyed him. Her name was Diane. She was beautiful in the way that makes a small-town man feel like he won, something he didn't deserve. She had dark eyes and a restless spirit and a laugh that made Jackson forget himself completely. They got married young, too young, some people said. But Jackson didn't care what people said. He loved her with everything he had, and for a while she loved him back. They had 2 kids, Emma, who was 7 years old and had her daddy's steady eyes and her mama's wild curls, and Lucas, who was 5, who collected rocks from the creek and carried them in his pockets everywhere he went, and who still crawled into Jackson's bed on nights when the thunder got too loud. 2 beautiful kids who deserved the whole world. But Diane was not happy. She had never quite been happy, not in Clover Creek, not in their small house on Birchwood Lane, not in the life that Jackson had built with his 2 hands and his whole heart. She wanted something more, something bigger, something that a Tennessee town with 1 stoplight and a gas station diner could not give her. Jackson knew it. He saw it in the way she stared out the kitchen window sometimes, like she was looking at something nobody else could see. He just never thought she would actually go, but she did. On a Tuesday morning in March, when the sky was the color of old pewter and the trees were just starting to think about blooming, Diane packed 2 suitcases while the kids were at school and Jackson was under a truck at Merritt's auto. She left a note on the kitchen table. It was 6 sentences long. Jackson read it 4 times, standing in his work clothes with grease still on his hands, and then he folded it very carefully and put it in the kitchen drawer, and he never read it again. She didn't say goodbye to the kids. That was the part that broke Jackson, not her leaving. He could understand leaving, even if it shattered him. But she didn't say goodbye to Emma and Lucas. She just drove away like they were furniture she'd decided not to take. And Jackson stood in that kitchen for a long time after he read that note, staring at the 2 small backpacks hanging by the front door, and he made himself a promise. A quiet, iron promise that he sealed somewhere deep in his chest where nothing could touch it. Those kids would never feel that emptiness, not if he had anything to say about it. Picking Emma and Lucas up from school that afternoon was the hardest thing Jackson Merritt had ever done in his life. Emma knew something was wrong the second she saw his face. She was 7 and sharp as a tack, that girl. She climbed into the truck and looked at him and said, "Where's Mama?" And Jackson looked at his daughter, and he did not lie to her. But he also chose his words like a man choosing which wire to cut. He said, "Mama had to go away for a while, baby. But I'm here. I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere." Lucas didn't ask. Lucas just pressed his small face into Jackson's arm and stayed there the whole drive home. And Jackson drove with 1 hand on the wheel and 1 hand holding his son. And he did not cry until both kids were asleep that night. He sat on the back porch steps in the cold March air, and he cried the way men cry when they think nobody can hear, silently with his whole body, his face in his hands. And then he wiped his face, went inside, and got to work. People in Clover Creek expected Jackson to fall apart. Everybody waited for it, the way you wait for a structure to collapse after the foundation cracks. His neighbor Ruth Hadley brought over a casserole and looked at him with that careful look people give you when they're expecting disaster. His buddy Dale Cooper offered to take the kids for a weekend, implying that Jackson might need time to get his head straight. Even his own mother called from Knoxville and suggested, gently, that maybe the children would be better off spending some time with her until things settled down. Jackson thanked every single one of them. And then he kept going. He rearranged his work schedule so he could drop Emma and Lucas off at school every morning himself. He learned to do Emma's hair, watched YouTube videos at 11 o'clock at night, his big rough hands fumbling with a hairbrush and a pack of rubber bands, practicing on a pillow until he got the braids right. He showed up to every school event, every parent-teacher conference, every little league game and school play and birthday party. He packed lunches every morning and made dinner every night and sat at that kitchen table doing homework with his kids until every problem was finished. He was exhausted in a way that had no bottom to it. There were nights he fell asleep sitting up on the couch, still in his work clothes, and woke up at 3 in the morning to carry himself to bed. There were mornings he stood in the shower for 10 minutes, just to have 60 seconds of silence before the day started again. There were moments in quiet, honest moments, when the weight of it pressed down on him so hard he couldn't breathe. But he never let his kids see it. Not once. Emma went through a phase, about 4 months after Diane left, where she stopped talking much. She'd come home from school and go straight to her room and sit by the window, and Jackson would stand in the doorway watching her and feel something in his chest that had no name. One evening he went in and sat on the edge of her bed and didn't say anything for a long time. Emma stared out the window. Jackson stared at his hands. Then Emma said very quietly, "Did Mama leave because of us?" Jackson turned to look at his daughter and felt something crack open inside him. He reached out and pulled her close, and he held her for a moment before he answered, because he wanted to get this exactly right. He said, "No, baby, no. Your mama leaving had nothing to do with you or Lucas. That was grown-up stuff. And none of it, not one single piece of it, was because of you. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. You and your brother are the reason I get up every morning. Don't you ever let that thought back in your head again." Emma cried. Jackson held her and let her cry for as long as she needed. And when she was done, she wiped her face and looked up at him and said, "Are you ever going to leave, Daddy?" Jackson Merritt looked his daughter dead in the eye and said, "Never, not ever. You couldn't make me leave." Emma nodded like she was filing that away somewhere permanent. And slowly, over the weeks that followed, she started talking again. Lucas healed differently. Lucas healed through his father's presence. The way a plant heals through sunlight, just by having it there, consistently, every single day. He needed Jackson near him. He needed to know his dad was in the next room, needed to hear his voice, needed the specific comfort of Jackson's, hand on the back of his head when he was scared. Jackson gave it without measure or complaint. Every time Lucas reached for him, Jackson was already there. Years passed. The kids grew. Emma became a teenager who was fierce and funny and fought with Jackson about curfews and borrowed his truck, without asking, and made the honor roll 3 semesters in a row. Lucas grew tall and quiet and thoughtful, and he still collected things. Not rocks anymore, but old coins, old maps, pieces of history he'd find at flea markets and bring home to show his dad. They were good kids, remarkable kids, and Jackson knew it in his bones, that the people they were becoming had been shaped in the space that could have been, hollow but wasn't, because he had filled it with everything he had. Diane called twice over the years, once when Emma was 12, once when Lucas was 14. Both times the kids took the call, and both times they handed the phone back to Jackson afterward with faces that were carefully blank. Jackson never asked what was said. He just made sure that after each call, they did something together, drove to the lake, or made a big Sunday breakfast, or stayed up late watching movies and eating too much popcorn. Emma graduated high school on a Saturday, in May, when the whole town of Clover Creek turned out in the bleachers of the football field. Jackson sat in the front row in the nicest shirt he owned, with Lucas beside him. And when Emma walked across that stage and took her diploma and looked out into the crowd, she found her father's face immediately. And Jackson stood up, just stood straight up out of his seat before anyone else, and clapped so hard his hands hurt. And Emma laughed from up on that stage. Laughed with tears running down her face, and the whole town saw it. After the ceremony, Emma found him on the field and walked straight into his arms, still in her cap and gown, and held on. Jackson held her back, his chin on top of her head, eyes closed. Lucas stood beside them with his hands in his pockets, trying to look like he wasn't also crying and failing completely. Emma pulled back and looked at her father and said, "I need you to know something, Dad." Jackson said, "What's that, baby?" She said, "I know what you did. I know what you gave up. I know how hard it was, and I know you never once let us feel it. And I need you to know that I see it. I see every single thing you did for us, and I am never going to forget it." Jackson opened his mouth and closed it again. He was not a man who cried easily. He had spent 12 years making sure of that. But standing on that football field in the Tennessee sunshine with his daughter looking at him like that, he felt his eyes fill up, and he didn't stop it. He said, "You don't owe me anything, Emma. Raising you was the greatest thing I ever got to do." She shook her head and said, "No, Dad, you don't understand. You were enough. You were always enough. You were more than enough." And Jackson Merritt, who had fixed engines and fences and everything that broke in Clover Creek. Tennessee, who had held his family together with nothing but his hands and his heart, and his absolute refusal to let his children feel abandoned. Jackson stood on that field and let himself be broken open, just for a moment, by the goodness of what he had built. Because a mother's love is a grace that children should never have to live without. But a father's love, when it is given completely, without reservation, without end, can fill every hollow space, heal every quiet wound, and raise children so whole, so loved, so rooted in the knowledge that they matter, that they walk out into the world like they were never missing anything at all. And that is exactly what Jackson Merritt did. He filled every space, every single one,